These questions are from Jeppesen's General Technician Oral and Practical Study Guide. Each question has a 6-second delay for you to answer. Shorter answers have a 4-second delay. The DME does expect you to answer in your own words. So, take these answers and convert them into something you can remember and something you can elaborate on. Chapter 1, Mathematics. Describe the result of adding a large positive number and a smaller negative number. The result is a smaller positive number and is the same as ignoring the signs and subtracting the smaller number from the larger number. How do you convert a fraction into a decimal? Divide the top number, also known as the numerator, by the bottom number, also known as the denominator. What is the key step that must be performed in order to add or subtract unlike fractions? You must find the lowest common denominator. How do you divide one fraction by another? You invert the divisor and multiply the numerators together and the denominators together. This answer has 2 correct answers. How can you convert a decimal into a percent? One, by multiplying the decimal by 100 and add the percent sign. Or 2, move the decimal point 2 places to the right and add the percent sign. How do you convert a fraction into a percent? Convert it into a decimal, move the decimal point 2 places to the right, and then add the percent sign. How do you change a decimal into the nearest equivalent fraction? Multiply the decimal by the desired denominator. The result becomes the numerator in the fraction. This question has 3 answers. What are 2 different ways that a ratio may be expressed? One, as a fraction. 2, by placing a colon between the 2 numbers. And 3, by using the word 2 between the numbers. What is a proportion? A statement of equality between 2 or more ratios. What is meant by the root of a number? A root is 2 or more equal smaller numbers that, when multiplied, equal the specified number. How do you find the square of a number? Multiply the number by itself. Examples: 4 times 4 equals 16, or 7 times 7 equals 49. What is a common method of making computations involving very large or very small numbers more manageable? Convert the numbers into scientific notation by using powers of 10. How is 100,000 expressed as a power of 10? 10 to the 5th power. This is a 2-part question. What formula is used to find the area of a rectangle and of a triangle? For a rectangle, area equals length times width. For a triangle, area equals half base times height. Define pi. Pi is a constant that expresses the relationship between the circumference of a circle and its diameter, and is approximately equal to 3.1416. Describe a trapezoid. A trapezoid is a closed, 4-sided figure having 2 parallel sides and 2 sides that are not parallel. What is the formula for computing the area of a circle? Area equals pi times radius squared. Chapter 2, Physics. Define matter. Any substance that occupies space and has mass. Matter may exist in what states? solid, liquid, and gas. Define kinetic energy. Kinetic energy is the energy of motion. Work is the product of what two factors? Force and distance moved. What are the parts of a lever? A rigid bar and a pivot point called the fulcrum. A wheelbarrow is an example of what class of lever? A second-class lever. Are all three states of matter affected by thermal expansion? And if so, which state is affected the most? All three states are affected, with gases being affected the most. What is a British thermal unit? The unit of heat energy required to change the temperature of 1 pound of water and 1 degree of Fahrenheit. Name the three methods of heat transfer. Conduction, convection, and radiation. What term defines the temperature at which all molecular motion ceases? Absolute zero. Can liquids be compressed? No. Liquids are generally considered to be incompressible. What are the customary units used to express hydraulic or pneumatic pressure in the United States? Pounds per square inch. Describe how pressure is transmitted when a force is applied to a confined liquid. Pressure is transmitted equally in all directions. What formula expresses the relationship between force, pressure, and area? Force equals area times pressure. What is the approximate speed of sound at sea level on a standard day? (661 knots) or 340 meters per second. What is atmospheric pressure at sea level on standard day? (29.92 inches of mercury, or 1013.2 millibars. On standard day at sea level, what is the value for temperature? (59 degrees Fahrenheit, or 15 degrees Celsius. What are the factors that determine density altitude? Temperature and atmospheric pressure. What is the term used to describe the ratio between the amount of moisture actually present in the atmosphere as compared to the amount the air could hold if it was completely saturated? Relative humidity. What are four principal forces acting on an airplane in flight? Lift, drag, thrust, and gravity. What is the term that describes the angle between the relative wind and the chordline of an airfoil? The angle of attack. What are the factors that cause an airplane wing to stall? Stall is caused when the angle of attack exceeds a critical value and the airflow separates from the upper surface and becomes turbulent. What are the principal effects that result from lowering the flaps while in flight? Lift increases, drag increases, and stall speed decreases. What is the function of a wing-mounted vortex generator? Vortex generators delay or keep the airfoil from separating from the upper surface of a wing during high-speed flight. How does blade flapping help to compensate for dissymmetry of lift in a helicopter main rotor systems? Flapping increases the angle of attack and lift on the retreating blades, and decreases the angle of attack and lift on the advancing blades. How does airflow through the main rotor of a helicopter change during the transition from normal flight to auto-rotation? During normal flight, the air moves downward, and during auto-rotation, the air moves upwards. What is friction? The opposition to a relative motion between two objects in contact with each other. Chapter 3. Basic electricity. 1 kilowatt is equal to how many watts? 1,000. What law describes the most fundamental or basic relationships in an electrical circuit? Ohm's law. What are 3 elements of Ohm's law? Voltage, current, and resistance. This question can have 3 answers. How do you write Ohm's law as an equation? E equals I times R equals E divided by I, or I equals E divided by R. If the resistance in a DC circuit remains the same, but the voltage doubles, what happens to the amount of current flowing in the circuit? It also doubles. In a DC circuit, what unit measures power? Watts. What 3 elements are required to form an electrical circuit? A source of electrical energy, a load or resistance to use the electrical energy, and the wires or conductors to connect the source to the load. DC circuits can take one of 3 forms or types. What are they? Series, parallel, and complex, also known as series parallel. A 24-volt lead-acid battery has how many cells? 12. A fully charged lead-acid battery has a specific gravity that varies between what 2 values? 1.275 and 1.3. You must apply a correction to the specific gravity reading of an electrolyte of a lead-acid battery when the temperature is outside of what 2 values? Whenever the temperature is less than 70 degrees or more than 90 degrees Fahrenheit. What is the reason for having separate facilities for storing and servicing nickel, cadmium, and lead-acid batteries? The electrolyte in the 2 types of batteries is chemically opposite, and the fumes from one type can contaminate the electrolyte from the other type. The state of charge of a nickel-cadmium battery cannot be determined by measuring the specific gravity. For what reason? There is no significant change in the specific gravity of the electrolyte as the battery is charged or discharged. What is the principal advantage of AC current over DC current? Power can be transmitted over long distances more efficiently with a smaller wire because the voltage can be easily increased or decreased by a transformer. Define inductance. An induced voltage which is opposite in direction to the applied voltage. What component creates capacitance in AC circuits? A capacitor. How does a capacitor store electricity? The energy is stored in the form of an electrostatic charge or field that exists between 2 conductors separated by an insulator. What property of an AC circuit is defined by the term impedance? The total opposition to current flow. What are 2 reasons that might cause a nickel-cadmium battery to fail to deliver the rated capacity? faulty cells or cell imbalance. What are electrical values measured by typical multimeter? Voltage, current, and resistance. Chapter 4. Electrical generators and motors. There are no questions for electrical generators and motors on the FAA Oral and Practical Test for General. Chapter 5. Aircraft drawings. How many views are required to represent the important details of most aircraft parts? 1, 2, or 3 views are usually enough. What kind of parts can be represented by one-view drawings? Parts with uniform thickness, such as shims, plates, and gaskets. What is the name for a part of a drawing used to bring out important details, and how is it drawn? A detailed view, which is usually drawn to a larger scale than the main drawing. What is the purpose of schematic diagrams? They are primarily used for troubleshooting systems. Describe an orthographic projection. It is a way of drawing an object using different views at right angles to each other, such as top, front, and side. Why do manufacturers use symbols on aircraft drawings? Symbols are a form of shorthand and are used to convey the characteristics of a component with a minimum of drawing. Describe the appearance of lines used to show hidden views, alternate positions, and the middle of symmetrical objects, and give their proper name. Hidden views are shown with hidden lines, which are short, evenly spaced dashes. Alternate positions are shown with phantom lines, made up of light, alternating long dashes and 2 short dashes. Center lines, consisting of alternating long and short dashes, show the middle of the symmetrical objects. How can you determine if a drawing has been changed? A record of changes is listed either in a revision block or in ruled columns, which may be in the corner of a drawing or next to the title block. How are dimensions shown on aircraft drawings, and what is their purpose? Dimension lines are usually solid and generally broken at the midpoint for the insertion of the measurement. They provide a means to accurately represent the size of an object. What is the difference between allowance and tolerance? An allowance is the difference between the nominal dimension and the maximum and minimum permissible sizes. The tolerance is the difference between the extreme permissible dimensions, which may be found by adding the plus and minus allowances. What is meant by clearance when used on aircraft drawings? An allowable dimension between 2 parts. What kinds of information about an aircraft drawing can be found in the title block? The part or assembly name, the drawing size, the scale, the date, the company name, the name or initials of the person responsible for creating or approving the drawing. What information is contained in the bill of materials? A list of materials and parts needed to fabricate or assemble the component or system shown in the drawing. Chapter 6. Weight and balance. If an aircraft is loaded so that the aft CG limit is exceeded, what undesirable flight characteristics is likely to occur? The result will be tail heavy and may be unable to recover from a stall or spin. If all the records for an aircraft are missing, how would you determine the empty weight and the empty weight CG? The aircraft would have to be weighed, and a new weight and balance record would have to be prepared. Define tare weight and describe how it is handled when weighing an aircraft. Tare weight is the weight of anything on the scales that is not part of the aircraft. It must be subtracted from the scale weight reading to determine the net weight of the airplane. If a piece of equipment such as a radio is added to an aircraft, how can you determine the effect on weight and balance without re-weighing the aircraft? If the weight and balance records are kept up to date, a new weight and CG location can be determined by computation. Why is control of the weight and balance of an aircraft important? To provide maximum safety. What is the datum of an aircraft and what is its function? The datum is an imaginary vertical plane at right angles to the longitudinal axis of the airplane. It is the reference point from which all horizontal measurements are taken. How do you determine the moment of an item of equipment? The item is multiplied by its arm, which is the distance between the item and the datum. What are two ways of determining the arm of an item of equipment? Measure the distance between the item and the datum, or use data supplied by the manufacturer. What should be done to obtain a positive or plus moment aft of the datum? Add weight. What should be done to obtain a negative minus moment aft of the datum? Remove weight. What should be done to obtain a positive plus moment forward of the datum? Remove weight. What should be done to obtain a negative minus moment forward of the datum? Add weight. How does the category of aircraft affect its loaded weight? Aircraft certified in more than one category, such as normal and aerobatic, may have two different maximum gross weights and different useful loads. As you prepare an aircraft for weighing, you determine that there is equipment aboard that is not permanently installed and recorded on the equipment list. What should you do with this equipment? All equipment not permanently installed in the aircraft or included on the equipment list should be removed from the aircraft. Define the term residual fuel. Any fuel that remains in the tanks, lines, and engines after the system has been drained. Define the term of residual oil. Any oil that remains in the tanks, lines, and engines after the system has been drained. How should you account for fuel when weighing an aircraft to determine the weight and balance? Either drain the fuel until only unusable fuel remains, or fill the tanks full and subtract the weight of the usable fuel. Where are leveling instructions found, and describe one method of leveling an aircraft? Leveling instructions can be found in the Type Certificate Data Sheet, TCDS. An aircraft may be leveled using a spirit level at a specified point, or an aircraft may be leveled by using a plumb bob from a designated point along with a leveling scale or protractor. Define the term mean aerodynamic chord, or MAC. Mean aerodynamic chord is the chord drawn through the center of the wing plan area. Describe the two most common ways of showing the CG location and or CG range. In inches from the datum or in percent of the MAC. What is the purpose of an aircraft loading graph? It is a method for determining how to distribute the load so as to keep the CG within allowable limits. What is a ballast and why would you use it in an airplane? A ballast is weight added to an airplane to bring its CG into allowable or desired range. Installation of several new radios in the nose of an aircraft causes the forward CG limit to be exceeded. How can you correct this problem without removing the new equipment? Ballast may be installed in the tail to move the CG aft. How does the CG range of a helicopter compare to that of a fixed-wing airplane? Helicopters typically have a much smaller CG range. Chapter 7. Aircraft Structural Materials. How do you work harden a piece of metal? By cold working the metal. Describe the primary difference between thermosetting and thermoplastic. A thermosetting resin doesn't soften when heated and chars or burns rather than melting. A thermoplastic resin becomes soft and pliable when heated and hardened when cooled. Explain how thermoplastic and thermosetting resins are commonly used in modern aircraft. Plexiglass is a thermoplastic resin commonly used for windshields and windows. Thermosetting resins are most often used as the matrix material in composite structures. Name one of the types of resin commonly used as matrix material for aircraft composite laminates. Polyester resin or epoxy resin. What are some of the materials that are commonly used as reinforcing component in a composite structure? Fiberglass, aramid, also known as Kevlar, graphite, also known as carbon fiber, linen, and paper. What are the reasons that alloy steel that is responsive to heat treatment is usually less suitable for welding? It may become brittle and loses ductility in the area of the weld. This answer has multiple answers. Give one advantage of pre-preg materials. Answer 1. Pre-preg fabrics contain the correct amount of matrix. Answer 2. The matrix material evenly and completely permeates the reinforcing fibers. Answer 3. The matrix has the resin and hardener in the correct proportions. Chapter 8. Aircraft hardware. What is indicated by the markings on the heads of solid shank rivets? The material they are made of, and indirectly, their strength. How can you keep heat-treated aluminum alloy rivets soft enough to install after the quenching process? If the rivets are stored in a freezer, they will remain soft for several days. What is the grip length of a bolt? The length of the unthreaded portion. In what way are AN standard steel bolts identified? By the code markings on the bolt heads. What is the difference between a close tolerance bolt and a general purpose bolt? Close tolerant bolts are machined to more accurate dimensions. For what types of applicants are self-locking nuts not allowed? Self-locking nuts may not be used when either the bolt or the nut is subject to rotation. If the maintenance procedures do not specify a torque value for a bolt or nut, how can you determine the proper torque values? Consult a standard torque table, such as found in AC 4313-1B. What is the most commonly used type of aircraft control cable? Extra flexible 7x19 stainless steel cable. Chapter 9. Hand tools and measuring devices. What type of precision measurement instruments can be used to measure the outside dimensions of an aircraft part? Outside micrometers and vernier calipers. For what reason should a micrometer be periodically calibrated? If dropped, its accuracy may be affected, or if the spindle is over-tightened, the frame may be sprung, or continually sliding objects between the anvil and the spindle may wear the surfaces. Chapter 10. Fluid lines and fittings. What are the two types of fluid lines most commonly used in aircraft? Rigid metal lines and flexible hoses. Describe the method of classifying metal tube according to size. Metal tubing is sized according to wall thickness and outside diameter. Outside diameter is measured in 1/16 of an inch increments. When installing stainless steel tubing, what type of fittings should be used? Stainless steel fittings. What is the function of a sleeve on a flared tube fitting? The nut fits over the sleeve and draws the sleeve and the tubing flare tightly against the male fitting to form the seal. Describe the two types of flares commonly used on aircraft tubing. Single flare and double flare. How can you determine if a fitting is an AN type rather than an AC type? AN fittings have a shoulder between the flare cone and the end of the threads. AC fittings do not. What are the most significant differences between AN and AC fittings? Sleeve length, thread pitch, and the shoulder between the threads and the flare cone of an AN fitting. What are the names of the parts of a flareless tubing? The nut and the ferrule or sleeve. How do you tell a flareless fitting from a flare type fitting? Flareless fittings don't have a flare cone, and there is no space between the threads and the end of the fitting. What is the effect of over-tightening a flare type fitting? The sealing surface may be damaged or the flare cut off. In addition to being securely clamped, what is an additional requirement for installing metal, fuel, oil, and hydraulic lines? The lines must be electrically bonded to the structure. What are some of the most important advantages of Teflon tubing? It is compatible with nearly every liquid and has a broad operating temperature range, low resistance to fluid flow, and has a long shelf life and service life. Describe the identification markings most commonly found on flexible hoses. A ley line, identification such as mil-spec number, the manufacturer's name or symbol, the hose size, and a date code. How can you determine if a flexible hose has been correctly or incorrectly installed? The ley line will be straight if the hose is properly installed. A twisted ley line indicates an incorrect installation. How are flexible hose sizes designated? By the inside diameter, measured in 1/16 of an inch increments. What precautions must be observed when deburring the end of a tube after it's cut? The wall thickness must not be reduced in size or fractured. Describe the operation of a quick disconnect coupling. Each half has a valve that is held open when coupled and is spring-loaded closed when disconnected. If you fabricate a replacement for a flexible hose, what percentage of total length must be added to allow for movement under pressure? 5 to 8%. What happens to the tube when a flareless fitting is over-tightened? The tube is weakened and the nut drives the cutting edge of the sleeve too deeply into the tube. Why are quick disconnect fittings used? To provide a quick means to connect or disconnect a fluid line without loss of fluid or entrance of air into the system. Chapter 11. Non-destructive testing. This question has a longer break. Describe the steps involved in a dye penetrant inspection. The surface is cleaned, and then the penetrant is applied and allowed to dwell for a specified time. The penetrant is then removed with an emulsifier or cleaner. Once removed, the part is dried and the developer is applied. The results are then inspected and interpreted. Name some tools that are commonly used to assist in making visual inspections of a weld. A magnifying glass, a flashlight, mirror, and possibly a borescope. What are some of the non-destructing testing methods that may be used on aluminum parts? Visual, dye penetrant, eddy current, ultrasonic testing, and radiography. What process occurs during the preparation stage of a dye penetrant inspection when the penetrating liquid is applied and then removed for a cracked part? The penetrant enters the cracks by capillary action and remains until made visible by the developer. A correctly made butt weld will have what bead width and how much penetration. The bead width should be 3 to 5 times the thickness of the base metal, and there should be 100% penetration. What telltale characteristics are evidence of a cold weld? A cold weld has a rough, irregular edges that are not feathered into the base metal and has variations in penetration amounts. The penetration of a fillet weld should be what percentage of thickness of the base metal? 25 to 50%. Describe the basic steps for conducting a magnetic particle inspection. Magnetize the part, then coat the surface with ferromagnetic particles. If a defect or discontinuity is present, the particles align with this discontinuity, forming a visible pattern. Chapter 12. Cleaning and corrosion. Is there any requirement for cleaning aircraft prior to an annual or 100-hour inspection? It is not only good, common sense, but is legal requirement as specified in FAR Part 43, Appendix D. Discuss the general precautions that should be observed when washing an airplane. Avoid or protect areas which may be damaged or contaminated, such as pitot and static ports, hinges, sealed areas, and bearings. What are some of the more common light-duty cleaning agents? Soaps or detergents and water. What materials are commonly used as heavy-duty cleaners? Solvents and emulsions. What are preferred cleaners for plastic surfaces such as windshields? Mild soap and water or a manufacturer-approved cleaner. What types of cleaning agents should be used to remove grease, oil, or fuel from aircraft tires? Soap and water. This answer is a multiple part answer. Give at least 3 examples of the factors that cause or influence corrosion. Answer 1. The environmental conditions. Answer 2. The presence of dissimilar metals. Answer 3. The type of metal. Answer 4. The presence of electrolytes and or contaminants. Answer 5. The condition of protective coatings. This answer has multiple answers. Name at least 3 forms of corrosion. 1. Surface. 2. Intergranular. 3. Filiform. 4. Dissimilar metals or galvanic. 5. Oxidation. 6. Pitting. 7. Stress. And 8. Fretting. This answer has multiple answers. Name at least one cause of filiform corrosion. One. Improper or incomplete curing of a wash primer prior to painting. 2. Failure to completely wash off acidic surface contamination. What are visible signs of filiform corrosion? Blistered paint surfaces or worn or thread-like tracks or patterns under the paint. What are 2 primary factors that may cause development of stress corrosion cracks? A corrosive environment and sustained tensile stress. What are visible signs of fretting corrosion? The corrosion residue has a dark, smoky appearance and often appears around and streaming back from rivet heads. Why are piano-type hinges prime spots for corrosion? The steel pin and aluminum hinge material are dissimilar metals, and the hinge design tends to trap moisture and contaminants. What is the best way to protect piano hinges from corrosion? Keep them clean and properly lubricated. This answer has multiple answers. Provide at least 4 examples of procedures used to prevent corrosion. One. Cleaning. 2. Lubrication. 3. Treatment. 4. Sealing. 5. Inspection. 6. Installing protective covers. 7. Keeping the drain holes free and clear. Describe the tools that should be used to remove corrosion from anodized aluminum surfaces. Nylon scrubber pads such as Scotch-Brite, which is a trademark, bristle brushes, aluminum wool, or aluminum wire brushes. Describe the effects of using steel brushes or steel wool to remove corrosion from aluminum surfaces. Steel brushes or steel wool must not be used to clean aluminum because the steel particles can become embedded in aluminum and cause corrosion. What is the purpose of Aladyne? Aladyne, which is a trade name, is a chemical process that develops a protective film on aluminum alloys. This film improves corrosion resistance and paint adhesion. For what reason should you avoid cleaning anodized aluminum surfaces with aluminum metal polish? Aluminum metal polish should not be used on anodized aluminum surfaces because it will remove the anodize. Why should aircraft fabrics and plastics be cleaned with only recommended cleaners? Recommended cleaners cause the least amount of deterioration or damage. Chapter 13. Ground handling and servicing. There is an extended break for this question. Name at least 3 possible hazards that may be encountered during typical ground operations, such as engine run-up or taxiing. The possibility of fire, especially during engine starting, turning props, rotors, prop or jet blast, and inlet areas. Other aircraft, vehicles, people, and obstacles. Foreign objects such as rocks, gravel, rags, or loose hardware. High noise levels that might cause hearing damage. Hydraulic lock and radial engines. And weather vaning of tail wheel aircraft. What is the most generally used knot for tying down small aircraft? The bowline knot, although other anti-slip knots may be used. This question also has an extended break. Describe the precautions that should be taken to protect life and property while starting and running an aircraft engine. Study the procedures in the airplane flight manual. Be sure the propeller or inlet area is clear and check for loose stones, gravel, etc. that could be sucked into the prop or engine. Also ensure that the prop or jet blast doesn't blow into any hangars or other airplanes, and have a fire guard nearby. This answer also has a long pause. If the induction fire occurs while starting a reciprocating engine, what procedures should be followed to extinguish the fire? Continue cranking the engine to start it and suck in the fire into the engine. If the engine does not start and the fire continues to burn, discontinue the start attempt and extinguish the fire with a suitable fire extinguisher, typically CO2. This answer also has an extended pause. What safety procedures must be observed when hand propping a small aircraft engine? Become thoroughly trained. Have a qualified person in the cockpit check the brakes, call switch off before moving the prop, and make sure you have solid footing. When ready to start, call contact and listen for the reply. Swing the prop with the flat of your hand and move back from the prop arc. What procedure should be followed prior to starting large radial engine to detect or prevent hydraulic lock in the cylinders? Pull the propeller through by hand for 3 or 4 complete revolutions. Resistance to the prop turning indicates a possible hydraulic lock in at least one of the cylinders. What is the cause of hydraulic lock in large radial engines? Oil seeps by the piston rings and accumulates in the combustion chamber of lower cylinders. When a piston comes up on its compression stroke, the incompressible liquid seizes it. What is meant by the term hot start when starting a jet engine? Ignition occurs with an excessively rich mixture, leading to a rapid temperature rise that can exceed EGT limit. When towing an aircraft, should you use the tow vehicle or the aircraft brakes to stop the aircraft? The tow vehicle brakes should be used except in an emergency. Then the aircraft brakes may be used. Why should an aircraft technician become familiar with standard light signals? Light signals may be used when taxiing an airplane without a radio or when a radio becomes inoperative on a tower-controlled airport. If a mixture of aviation gas and jet fuel is used on a reciprocating engine, what are the possible results? Avgas contaminated by jet fuel must not be used in piston engines. The engines may be damaged or destroyed. What does the number 100 signify in 100 low lead aviation gasoline? It refers to the lean mixture performance number or octane rating of the fuel. Is it permissible to use avgas in turbine engines? Limited operations may be allowed by the manufacturer. Continued use may reduce efficiency due to lead deposits on the turbine blades. What are some of the possible outcomes of using lower grade avgas than specified grade? An increased chance of engine damage due to detonation, loss of engine power, and an increased probability of overheating. Part 23.973 of the FAA regulations specifies that certain markings must be placed adjacent to fuel filler openings. What markings are used for reciprocating engine-powered airplanes? The filler openings must be marked with the fuel grade and the word avgas. Describe the important precautions that should be observed when fueling an aircraft. Be certain that you are using the correct fuel, properly ground the aircraft and the refueling unit, and protect the aircraft surfaces from the hose and nozzle damage. The marking requirements for oil tank filler openings are specified in FAR 23.1157. What markings are required for piston engine powered airplane? The word oil and the permissible grades and/or types, or reference to the appropriate airplane flight manual for permissible grades and/or types. Where can standard aircraft taxi hand signals be found? In the Aeronautical Information Manual, or the AIM. Under what conditions should a reciprocating engine be pre-oiled? Prior to starting a new engine, or one that has been preserved for storage. This ensures adequate lubrication on initial startup. Under what conditions may automobile gasoline be used in an aircraft engine? Only if approved by the FAA, usually by the issuance of a STC, or a Supplemental Type Certificate. Chapter 14. Maintenance Publications, Forms, and Records. What federal aviation regulation prescribes the requirement for issuance of a type certificate? FAR Part 21. What part of the FAR describes airworthiness standards for transport category airplanes? FAR Part 25. What part of the FARs describe the performance characteristics that a small aircraft must demonstrate in order to be airworthy? FAR Part 23. Who is responsible for ensuring that only the most current information is used when performing maintenance on an aircraft? The person performing the maintenance. Why are airworthiness directives issued? To correct an unsafe condition found in aircraft, engines, propellers, or appliances. How does the FAA notify the owners of an unsafe condition that must be corrected? By issuing an airworthiness directive. How do you determine the time frame within which an AD compliance is required? The AD contains the compliance time or period for completing the corrective action. If a mechanic wishes to develop a checklist for an annual or 100-hour inspection, what publication contains the guidelines for the required inspection items? FAR Part 43, Appendix D, contains the scope and detail of an inspection checklist. How can you determine if the repair of damage is a major or minor repair? FAR Part 43, Appendix A, defines major and minor repairs, as well as preventative maintenance. What publications might you consult for guidance when maintaining an old aircraft with no maintenance manual exists? AC 4313-1B or its latest revision. What are advisory circulars? Non-regulatory information of interest to the aviation public. What publications would you consult to determine an aircraft's or engine or propeller's type design and its limitations? The type certificate data sheet and or the aircraft specifications. In what FAA publication could you find a list of engines approved for use in a specific make and model of an airplane? In the type certificate data sheet and or aircraft specifications. What reference material can be used to determine if an aircraft is certified in more than one category? The type certificate data sheet and or aircraft specifications. What is the name of the manual that the manufacturer provides to the technicians who normally perform work on the system and components of an aircraft? The Aircraft Maintenance Manual. Under what circumstances is compliance with the manufacturer's service bulletin mandatory? When the service bulletin is incorporated into an AD. What kind of publications are used by aircraft manufacturers to notify the owners of design defects and product improvements? service bulletins, service letters, and service instructions. If you need to determine the serviceable dimensional limits for an engine part, what publication could you consult? The current engine manufacturer's overhaul manual. How often is the summary of ADs published? Every 2 years. As a certified mechanic, will you automatically receive all ADs? No, ADs are automatically sent only to registered aircraft owners. How are AD updates issued to subscribers to the summary of aircraft worthiness directions? Through bi-weekly supplements. Where do you find the minimum scope and detail requirements that a 100-hour inspection checklist must contain? FAR Part 43, Appendix D. Records of a major alteration must be made in what two places? In the aircraft records and an FAA Form 337. When the completion of a FAA Form 337 is required, how many copies are normally prepared and what is their distribution? 2 signed copies. One is given to the aircraft owner, and one is sent to the local FAA Flight Standards District Office within 48 hours of the approval or return of the service. When an aircraft is sold, what do the regulations require regarding the disposition of records that contain the current status of airworthiness directives? The seller must transfer the records to the buyer at the time of the sale. For what period of time must an aircraft owner maintain the records of a 100-hour inspection? Until the work is superseded, or for 1 year after the inspection. In what publications may a mechanic find an example of maintenance record for a 100-hour inspection? FAR Part 43.11. Where should a 100-hour inspection be recorded? And the appropriate maintenance record for the airframe, power plant, propeller, or appliance. This is a multiple answer. What items must be entered into the aircraft records after maintenance is performed? One, a description of the work performed and or reference to acceptable data. 2, the date the work was completed. 3, the signature, certificate number, and the type of certificate of the person approving the aircraft for return to service. What person makes the final maintenance record entry after a 100-hour inspection is completed? The person approving the aircraft for return to service. What documents must be prepared when a required inspection is performed and the defects found which rendered the aircraft or engine unairworthy? The required maintenance entries must be made and a list of discrepancies and unairworthiness items must be furnished to the owner. What maintenance record entries are required to contain the aircraft total time in service? Only records of inspections require the total time. What regulation authorizes a certified mechanic who holds an IA to approve or disapprove a major repair or alteration? FAR 65.95. Who has the authority to rebuild an aircraft engine and return operating time to zero? Only the engine manufacturer or an overhaul facility approved by the manufacturer. Are there any circumstances when more than 2 copies of a Form 337 are required, and if so, when? Yes, 3 copies are required when a fuel tank is installed in the passenger or baggage compartment. The 3rd copy must be kept aboard the aircraft. How do the regulations define time in service in regard to maintenance record entries? With respect to maintenance entries, time in service begins when the aircraft leaves the surface of the Earth until it touches at the next point of landing. What are the penalties for making fraudulent or intentionally false entries in any required record or report? The applicable airman certificate can be suspended or revoked. What persons are authorized to make the required maintenance entry approving the return to service after progressive inspection is performed at a location other than the aircraft's home base? An applicable certified mechanic, an appropriately rated repair station, the aircraft manufacturer. What is the difference between the terms overhaul and rebuilding as they pertain to aircraft maintenance records? Overhauled engines must be tested to be approved or acceptable current standards and technical data. Rebuilt engines must be tested to the same tolerance and the limits as a new engine. When performing an inspection required by FAR Part 91, what rotorcraft systems must be inspected in accordance with the manufacturer's maintenance manual or instructions from the continued airworthiness? The drive shafts or similar systems, the main rotor transmission gearbox for obvious defects, the main rotor and center section, the auxiliary rotor or in helicopters. How can you determine that an aircraft part or appliance you receive is serviceable? By an approval for return to service in the maintenance record for the part or appliance with a completed Form 337.